LinkedIn's on. Looks like I got everything working today. The internet speed here is not that fast, so hopefully I don't have any connectivity issues, but overall I think it is working. Yep, that's on as well. All right. Wow. After 4 different tries of doing this, this is finally good. And now we know that this works. So, I'm going to pull up the chat overlay here. So, if you want to ask me any questions while we're doing this, I'd be open to your questions and I'll try to answer them and write them down. So, let me just close this so I can pay full attention to everything that's going on and look at the cameras. Okay, close this one. All right. All right, so today we are talking about property analysis. So I'm here in Texas. If you were following me on Instagram and you saw earlier, we came down, or I came down in order to oversee the pool renovation. So the previous owner, they had a pool that was covered up for whatever reason, and as I thought, it's in fairly good condition. We probably might have to do some painting of the pool, but luckily there's no cracks on it. The plaster is in good condition. We're going to be doing some of the tile work around it and replacing the pumps and the filters, etc. So, you know, we'll talk about that in a whole different separate videos when we're talking about commercial properties. But today what I wanted to talk about was the fundamentals of analyzing real estate when you're going to invest. And again, it doesn't matter if you're investing into a duplex, a 2-unit property, a 3-plex, a 4-plex, or you're buying 20 units, 200 units. Some of the fundamentals remain the same. So if you've been following this series, the goal that we are headed towards right now, the main goal is how to live rent-free forever. And again, the way that we're getting started, and again, if you're a little bit more advanced, this will apply to you as well. The way to get started, or at least the way I got started, was by using an FHA loan, using 3.5% down payment to buy an income-producing rental property, live in one unit for free, rent out the other ones, and then from there I was able to scale, and it's allowed me to do, you know, different things as far as entrepreneurship and stuff like that goes. So when you're looking at properties, there's probably 5 or 6 mistakes that I've seen clients make, and sometimes the bank catches some of this stuff, the appraisal, they catch some of this stuff, other times they don't. Again, in a scenario where you're buying an FHA loan, typically the banks, they have certain standards and certain things that they look into. So most of the time they catch it. But there was actually one scenario where I remember a real estate agent represented a client and they didn't catch this. And then because I was in the construction and architectural and engineering and had some experience on how to do permitting and how to go to the zoning and certificates of occupancy, which we'll get into all this stuff later on today, you know, they called me up in order to try to correct this issue, and we literally couldn't solve it. So if you go to maxcruzrealtor.com/guides, there's a buyer's guide in there. And in that buyer's guide, it does talk about some of this stuff. But again, just looking at it and breaking it down in the most simplistic way, what I want you to think about is the first thing that you're doing is what's your end goal, right? So your end goal is you're buying an income producing property in order to live rent free. So if that's your end goal, you want to try to, you know, whatever that monthly rental expense that you currently have, or even a mortgage expense, whatever that is right now, you want to try to get it as close to zero as possible. In today's environment, with the pricing structure where they are at, with the interest rates where they are at, unless you're buying a 3-plex or a 4-plex, it is very, very difficult to get zero if you're buying a duplex, a 2-unit property. And even before, I remember in 2011 when we did the numbers on a duplex, the rental market was still, you know, fairly lower, or depending on how you look at it, it was fairly lower. So the markets go like this, right? They climb over time, and it still hadn't done that. So because it hadn't done that, um, the numbers still didn't work out, right? You had lower rents, interest rates, and the pricing point where it was at. But still, if you were buying a duplex, a 2 unit property, you still have to come out with money out of pocket in order to cover the mortgage and the rest of the expenses. So just be aware of that. Again, if you're buying a commercial property, the goal, again, the end goal might be a little bit different. Maybe you're looking to maximize cash flow. Some people, what they buy is they buy some units riding the markets, right? And what they want to do is they want to park their money, they want to get some cash flow, and then resell in a 5 or 7 year. So again, understanding what your end goal is very important, because that will help you set the standards of what you look for when you are looking for the information about the property. So again, let's get into some of the things that I believe on the most basic level. Doesn't matter if you're buying a 2 unit, a 20 unit, or a 200 unit. On the most basic level, these are some of the things that you should look for. Number one, and believe it or not, I have seen this come up over and over and over where people don't check this. Go ahead and make sure that you check with the city. Some places it's the county, and some places it's the state. Most of the time it's the city, right? The municipality. What you want to check is for permits. In permits, in what sense? The permits, there's multiple permits. The first thing, if you're buying a multifamily property, is that you need a certificate of occupancy. Okay, that certificate of occupancy, what that is telling you is that the people that are living there, or the people that you are going to be renting to, they can legally occupy the property. Believe it or not, I have seen scenarios where some sellers will try to sell the properties and they don't have their certificate of occupancy. Some places, like for example Florida, if you're buying structures, it doesn't matter if it's a condominium building, if it's an apartment building. Commercial is a little bit different, but some structures, they require what's called a 40-year certification process. So especially in Florida, if you have a lot of structural damage and you're buying a property and you're like, wow, this is a great price for this 20 unit, but you're 3 years away from your 40-year certification, and I know California has some similar things. You know, if you're not looking at these things, all of a sudden in year 3, wow, nobody can live here anymore because there's all these structural issues that you weren't aware of. So make sure you're aware of what the certificate of occupancy are what the standards are, and what some of the things required in certain municipalities to do. Okay, so that certificate of occupancy is number one. Number two is you definitely want to check within the city or the county or the state to make sure the allowable use. Some places, and again, if you look at, and I think we're gonna see some of this happen again, especially because of the housing shortage. Some places in the 50s and 60s where there was a large population boom, and you had all your baby boomers and all that stuff, we had a very similar scenario to what we have today with a housing shortage. So today we're about, historically speaking, we're about 6 million units short. So as my good friend Jerome Maldonado, also as other builders and developers have looked at it, it would take an act of God. It would be a miracle in order to fix the demand that is necessary, to provide the supply that is necessary to fill the demand that is out there. So understanding that we're 6 million units short across the United States, you still have to look at micro markets. But anyways, as I was saying, the use, right? What ended up happening in the 50s and 60s is because the population was growing so fast, the zoning departments, they allowed some restrictions to be lightened, if you will. So in areas that was only residential single family, they allowed it to be, for example, residential multifamily up to 2 units. And that's where you have some neighborhoods that you're driving around that have some single family homes, some duplexes, 2-family homes, and then some of them have 3-family, 4-family. Some places like, outskirts of New York City, Queens, what else? You have Queens, White Plains, Yonkers, for example, is a great study. Philadelphia is another one. A lot of these places like that, you can see where you have these neighborhoods that's like single family, multifamily, industrial, commercial, hospitals. So it was very, very, the zoning kind of relaxed and it allowed to do that. Anyways, going back to that, just because you're seeing that this two family is there, is it allowed, right? What happened to this client that I remember, this real estate agent sold them a 3 unit building. Now again, they did everything correctly. They went to the city. They saw that on record it had been used as a 3 unit, and it was showing up as 3 units. It was being taxed as a 3 unit, right? Now the one mistake that they did is that they didn't have the certificate of occupancy for 3 units. Okay, so it was showing as it was being used as a 3 unit, but again, because it was a bank-owned property, the bank was selling it as is. They took a chance on it, and ultimately, when they went to get the certificate of occupancy, surprise, right? The city came back and actually said, "Hey, look, at one time it was being used as a 3 family, it was being taxed as a 3 family, but you need to get the certificate of occupancy. Now the codes have changed. In order for it to be a 3 family, you need to fire sprinkler the whole building. So we're not going to give you a rental permit for the 3rd unit. It's legally a 2 family house." And we tried everything. We did the floor plans, we did the zoning board of appeals, we went to the meetings, we got an engineering company out there in order to give them estimates. We showed them how it was not financially feasible for the owner. We showed them all the records, and ultimately the city said, "Look, we don't care. This is what it is, and it has to be used as a 2 unit." So again, when you have that certificate of occupancy and you understand the use, you're more or less 99% guaranteed that you'll be able to continue utilizing that property in order for what you want to use it. Okay. The next thing that you want to look at is your water and sewer. And why do I say this? Is because some people think that, for example, this happened to one of our properties in Massachusetts where we recently realized it's like, wow, the water usage is going up, but what is really going on? And we went back, and now that we're in accounting season, we're looking back through some of the records, comparing, looking at studies, right? We found that before in Massachusetts, the way that they charge it, and in some places they do the same thing, they charge you a water fee, right? So the water supply, and then they charge you a sewer. And in some cases, the water, when we purchased this was like in 2016, I think the water was like $2.25, and the sewer was like $3.50. So it was like $5.50, $6 combined, right? Today, in 2023, the two numbers combined, it was like $4.50 or $4.65 for the water, and something like $6.50 or $6.75 and change for the sewer, right? So when you add those two numbers up, now all of a sudden we're like at $12. So that has doubled, right? The cost has doubled. In some scenarios, it's tripled. So understanding, getting that actual history for the water and sewer, you can see is like, okay, I see that the number is going up, but what is really going up? Is the usage of the property going up, or are the tenants using the same amount of water, or has the rates gone up that now, it's pretty high up there? The reason that you want the actual water bill and you want to look at that is because of two things. Number one, you want to see where the city is going. And again, if you live in your local environment, you can go to your zoning board meetings or your city council meetings, and they'll talk about this. Like here in Texas, right? They were talking about the filtration systems on the pumps, and this was before we bought the property. So I'm aware that the water bill is going to go up about 10% because of the certain things that they do. Now, if I wasn't aware of that, and again, if you're a more experienced investor and you're buying a 20 unit, a 200 unit, if you don't know that, the water bill is going to go up potentially 10%, and now you buy this property and you crunched your numbers so tight and the seller wasn't willing to negotiate, and your numbers are just super tight, you might lose your shirt because you didn't calculate for that increase in the water and sewer. And again, that might be a negotiation item where you go back to the seller and say, hey, look, I understand that this is what it's selling for right now. This is your cap rate. This is your income, your expenses. We'll get to all that in this video. Don't worry about that. But because this is going to go up, it's going to throw off the numbers. So we need to negotiate on price. So again, understanding the water and sewer situation is important. Now, a lot of the parts in the United States, they have septic systems, right? A septic system is just a storage tank, and they, every time you go to the bathroom, doesn't matter if you do number 1 or number 2, it goes into the storage tank. Some of them have to be pumped. Other ones, they have a percolating system, but there's still some maintenance required. So knowing, and then again, for example, on water, let's say you don't have public water supply and you're on a well system, understanding, what it is that's happening with the water and sewer situation is important, because now you could plan for maintenance, okay? Let's see. The next thing that you definitely want to look at is the property tax bill in itself. So the property tax bill, again, will allow you to see where that trend is going. I remember when I worked for Joe Palaio, that was the top broker in South Florida for commercial real estate transactions. He actually showed me to pay attention to this, and if it wasn't because of Joe, I wouldn't realize it. But a lot of politicians, and I know, some places were up for re-election or whatever, a lot of politicians, they'll actually do their campaigns by saying, hey, if you elect me, this happens a lot, mostly in tax assessors that you vote in, or it happens a lot in city council members. They'll actually say, hey, we're up for voting for property taxes. If you elect me, I'm actually going to lower your property tax bill. Understanding how property taxes work is very, very important, because what ends up happening is your tax bill is a combination of 2 things. The first thing is what's called the millage rate. The millage rate is a term per thousand, so that every $1,000 there's a millage rate. So it's whatever, $1, $2, $3, 38 cents. It's all over the place, right? Look at that millage rate, and you can go to your city or county and you can ask them, hey, can I get a 10-year historical period of your millage rate? And again, what you'll see is you'll see a line, and that line will be very, very evident. Are your millage rate going up at a 1% increase, or are they going up at a 10% increase, or have they been, pretty much up and down, but they stay more or less at the same amount of whatever, 50 cents per or $1 per thousand, right? So understand millage rate, number 1. Number 2 is your assessed value. The assessed value of your property has nothing to do with the real estate market at all. And again, a lot of people are they're going into their tax assessor, and they're like, oh, well, look, you're trying to sell an $800,000 property in San Francisco, and the tax assessor says that it's only worth $600,000. Again, the tax assessor, they have their own separate formulas for how they come up with their values, but your assessed value is based on 2 things, your land and the building value. So typically the land, the property taxes, the millage rate on the land will be much lower, and then on the buildings that will fluctuate. And again, you'll see that number, especially, past COVID, the taxes have definitely gone up. But again, you have to look at the 2 things, the assessed value of the property and the millage rate. Because a lot of places, what they've done is they've said, okay, because we're politicians and we're doing this thing, we're actually going to lower your taxes. And then they'll go and they'll show you, look what we did, right? The millage rate was $5 per thousand. We lowered it to $4.50, so we lowered your taxes. But there was a provision in the thing that they approved that actually changed the way that they assess properties. So now all of a sudden, that property that was assessed for $300,000 on the taxes, right? Now all of a sudden the tax office is saying, okay, well, now we've changed that provision. We're going to assess it for $375,000. So your millage rate went down 50 cents, but the property assessed value went up 75,000. So guess what happened? Your property taxes go up. And when you go in and you complain to your politicians, they will show you and they say, hey, here it is. I lowered the taxes. It was not my fault that the assessor's office are charging you a different amount, right? So be aware of that, the taxes and what's happening with that. Um, the next thing you definitely want to look for is the insurance policy, and look for the current, most recent insurance policy. And again, sometimes you can ask for this. If you're, buying a duplex or a threeplex, most of the time they can give it to you, or most of the time they will say it's about this amount, but ask for it. And what you want to do is that on that insurance policy, and I learned about this. Not that I learned about this, but I guess I changed my mindset about this about 2 weeks ago when I went to the Infinity Investing um, Mastermind in Indianapolis. So if you really think about it, we're all self-insured. And what do I mean by that? Yes, you need to have property insurance for the property that you're buying in case you have a fire claim and the building is 100% destroyed. You need to have that. But nevertheless, that premium that you're paying on the policy has various factors in it, and that's where you have all these things that have, an aggregate amount of $1 million for liability, the property value, the maximum, um, uh, what them called the maximum replacement value is 850,000, and then they'll have all these deductibles and all these scenarios and things for flood, things for theft, things for lost rents, all of that stuff. Something that's overlooked a lot of times is, for example, the deductible. A lot of and again, remember, the insurance brokers, they want to protect you in the best way, right? But ultimately, they make a commission based on the premium of what they're able to charge, right? So there's a direct correlation in some scenarios where you say, well, I could take a little bit more risk. I'm okay with a $5,000 deductible. Because look, let's be honest with you. There's a property in Massachusetts that we've owned since 2011, the same one that I bought using an FHA loan, that we still have. That property, when we look at insurance, I have, in the last 12 years, I have never done an insurance claim, right? And every single year, the insurance keeps on going up, keeps on going up. It's just the market, right? So when I first had insurance, it was like 2,900, 2,800, and now it's up to, I think it's 4,400 is what we were last year. Now I started looking at this, and something came up and said, hey, I've never done a claim on this, and most likely, if I needed to do a repair that was, if I don't know, something happened and the claim ended up being 6,500, and I had a $5,000 deductible, it's gonna knock it. They're only gonna pay me $1,500. I'm gonna have to go through the whole claim process, and I'm still gonna have to come up with $5,000 out of pocket. I'm probably not gonna do that, right? So same thing. If for God forbid the property has partial fire damage and it burns the roof, and now you need a new roof and you need to remodel that apartment. Let's say your claim is gonna be $75,000. Let's just use that as an example. If you have let's say a $1,000 deductible, or if you have a $10,000 deductible, sure, that's money that you're gonna have to come out of pocket, $1,000 out of pocket versus $10,000 out of pocket. But the likelihood of that happening, I don't know. So that's a risk that you can evaluate. So what we've done on some properties is, again, where we've had no claims on insurance at all, we've actually reached out to our insurance broker and said, hey, look, we need to rewrite our policies. Go ahead and increase our deductibles to a higher amount. And what that has done is has brought down our premiums, allowing us to maximize our cash flow. Now, again, I'm understanding that I'm exposing myself to more risk in the scenario that there was $30,000-$40,000 worth of damage and I needed to do an insurance claim. I know that I'm going to have to come up with $10,000 out of pocket. But again, it's a $40,000 claim. I'm going to have to come up with some money no matter what. So, evaluate that. Again, if you request those records, you can see, what things you might be able to play around with in order to lower your insurance, hence lowering your mortgage amount, and maybe you could play around with those numbers. The next thing that you want to do is, this actually came up recently, and I was just talking about this with my cousin, is you want to look at any existing contracts. For example, some properties, you see this a lot in like single family homes, but I've seen it even in duplexes or some threeplexes. Some people will end up getting solar panels on their roofs, and other will have, like a contract with ADT, the security devices, or with Comcast or whatever. And some of those things, because what they'll do is they'll come and say to you, hey, come install ADT security. It'll be free installation, and then you just pay $100 a month. Nothing is free, right? What they're doing is they're locking you into that contract, and they're essentially gonna charge you in that monthly fee some part of that installation cost. So some of those contracts you can't really cancel or get out of. That you actually have to transfer them when you sell. So be aware of that. Ask for those contracts. Same thing with the solar panels. Somebody might have installed solar panels on a duplex or on a threeplex. When you do that, the first thing that I will say on multifamily properties, when you install solar panels on a duplex or a threeplex, what you have to do as an owner, as a landlord, is you have to put all of the electric utility in your name. So now you own all of the electric 100%. So that way, when they feed the electric lines to the solar grid, there's just one bill for the whole entire property, and now you're stuck with all of that. When you sell, right, because in essence you're leasing, or you're renting the solar panels, that's why you get them for free, right? Because you're renting them, you have to transfer over the contract. I've seen in some scenarios, this recently happened on a duplex, in some scenarios when you get your bank appraisal, the bank appraisal will actually add that in as a liability, and now all of a sudden that $25,000 remaining contract, they'll say, well, the property market value is 350, but you have this lien on your property. It's essentially a lien that's $25,000. So the most we can lend is 325,000, and now based on your 10% down payment or 5% down payment, you got to come up with more out of pocket, because now you got to take over those payments. So again, be aware of the existing contracts that are out there. The next thing you want is, you definitely want to, and most likely you won't do this initially. You'll just take at whatever the broker or whatever information you're getting from the seller. They'll say, hey, this unit is rented for, the rent roll. This unit is rented for this amount. This unit is for that amount. When you're going into your due diligence, make sure that you ask for copies of those leases, because in the copies of those leases, you might find out that the owner is actually, for example, this happens a lot, Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, you do not have to include a refrigerator in your rent. If you find out that the refrigerator is included, that means that if the refrigerator goes bad, you as the landlord have to now replace the refrigerator. So be aware of that. The other thing that you want to do is you want to see when the lease ends. Just because the owner's telling you, oh yeah, I think there's another 6 months on the lease, they might forget. They're not looking it over, right? And the other thing is the lease renewable? What are the terms on the lease? If they had to add, for example, we have some units that are larger units, and there are provisions in there that limit the amount of people. For example, in a 4-bedroom, even though the city allows us to have 8 occupants, when we sign the lease, we say, hey, these are the approved occupants. If you wanted to add occupants, this is the process. We need their identification. We need their job history. We need their background checks. And what that allows us to do is, if the tenant, for whatever reason, had somebody come in and now all of a sudden they said that they lived there, now we can potentially evict all of the tenants from the property and say, hey, I'm sorry, but you guys broke the terms of their lease. You go to court, you do all that stuff. But again, you're showing that you have all that information, versus if you don't know what the terms of the lease are and it just says, hey, this apartment is rented to this person, and there are no provisions for the maximum occupancy, and there's no provisions for if they wanted to bring in additional guests or additional tenants. All of a sudden, the next thing you know, you got 10 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment. What are you going to do then, right? So once you have that signed contract for your purchase and sale agreement, make sure you get the actual copies of the leases. Let's see. Utilities. The next thing you want to look at is utilities. Now, especially if you're buying a duplex, a threeplex, or a fourplex, Some scenarios this doesn't happen. If you're buying larger 20 unit, 40 unit, most of the time it's separate. But what you have is you need to understand common areas. What are common areas, right? So for example, in a duplex, let's say it's a townhouse side by side where you literally have an entryway and all the lighting on the outside, and then you have another entryway, all the lighting on the outside. In those scenarios, most likely you will not have what's called a common meter, right? Because you don't have any common areas, right? One side, everything is on one side, the other side, everything is on the other side, right? In some scenarios, you might have some exterior lighting that's on a light pole or something like that. But let's say in a scenario where you have, for example, a threeplex, and there, you know, you have your basement, you have your first floor, you have your second floor, you have your third floor, you have a front stairwell, you have a rear stairwell. In those scenarios, you need to understand that the front stairwell, the basement, and the rear stairwell, I should have done, I don't know why I did it back and forth, but the front stairwell, the basement, and the rear stairwell, those are common areas. Also, the lighting on the outside, it's also a common area because, again, you can't just bill like your third floor tenant, oh, I'm going to connect this exterior light to your unit and now you have to pay, right? That's not fair. So that's what's called common areas. In some areas, most of the time it's only electric. In some areas, I have seen heated common areas. For example, the basement, for whatever reason, some people want to have storage in there. They want to prevent pipes from being broken, so they'll have like electric heat or something like that. But most of the time, I would say 99% of the time, it's just electric common areas. In commercial properties, and again, if you'll have like a 20 unit or a 40 unit, or most likely if you have like a larger 100 unit apartment complex, you'll have like a lobby area and all that stuff. So you have lighting in there, you have HVAC, all of those things in there. You need to account for the common area utilities and make sure you ask for that. When you go to the property, actually look for the meters. If there's 2 units and you see that it has the front stairwell, the basement, and the rear stairwell, and there's only 2 meters, somebody's paying for that light in the front stairwell, the basement, and the rear stairwell. So who is it? Is it the first floor unit? Is it the second floor unit? Right? You need to know those things, right? So again, common area utilities, ask for that. Some people have sprinkler systems, right? Ask for that. Hey, in some scenarios, and we do this in some of the larger multifamily, you'll have what's called RUBS, Radio Utility Billing Systems. What those are is, in most places, if you have individually metered utilities, for example, water, if you have that utility, you can actually bill back your tenant for the water usage that they have, right? They're already paying their own electrical, they're already paying for their own gas, they might be putting their own oil if they have oil heating or propane or whatever the scenario is. But on the water usage, if you have an actual meter, and again, a lot of this will happen in commercial properties, you can bill back for a portion of whatever that water bill is coming from, right? So that's one of the things that we look into is, the actual utilities that are there and are the meters in place. So, the other thing that you want to look at is trash. I know some places they actually charge for trash collection. And again, that's something that you want to know, because if you have 2 units or if you have 4 units and you as the landlord are paying for the trash, if let's say it's $10 a month, let's just put a figure out there. Let's say it's $10 a month per unit. If you're gonna throw that back on your tenant, you want to make sure you have that into your lease agreement and that you're adjusting it in your rent. And if not, you want to make sure that you're calculating those expenses, because again, most of the time in commercial it doesn't happen, just because if you have a commercial building, you already have a waste service agreement, and again, you're looking at what those agreements are and you're calculating that. But again, that's important to know. Let's see, there was one other thing that I wanted to mention here. Okay, the next thing that you want to look into is the actual condition of the property, right? And ask them. Some people in the description, you'll see it say, for example, roof installed in 2019, electrical upgraded in 2014, kitchens and bathrooms upgraded in this, or if it's brand new construction, the property was built in 2022. So again, you want to have that information. And the reason that you want to have that is because is permitting, right? Going back to the first thing that we talked about. If all of a sudden you're walking through the property and the owner tells you, is like, yeah, it has a brand new roof, nothing is leaking, it's great, the electrical was updated, everything is going well, and you've gone to the city and you see, hey, yeah, the property, we have their certificate of occupancy from when it was built in 1955, and that's about it. It doesn't look like they've done any work on the property. You're walking through the property and you see that it has a new kitchen, has new plumbing, new electrical. You might want to ask yourself, hey, who did the work? Did you get the permits for it? Now, in some scenarios, again, most of this happens in, I would say, tertiary markets, suburban areas, or very, I want to say rural, but areas where the population are small, where it's like, hey, the city hall is like the size of this bedroom, and um, your mayor sits over there, and then he's got an assistant over here, and then there's one person who's the tax collector and does 99% of those things. I remember this happened to us in a property in Massachusetts when we were doing construction. And when we went in, it was like the building inspector was there like 3 days out of the month. So again, it happens. So again, when you go into the city and you see that, hey, some of these records show that there's nothing been done on the property, but you walk through the property, you see that it has new siding, new this stuff, ask the city, hey, and you don't want to get the owner in trouble or anything, but say, hey, I'm possibly looking into buying some property in town. What are your requirements for construction if I'm going to renovate, a bathroom or whatever? Most of the time, if most of the places, they'll have a process. They'll say, hey, for electrical, you need a licensed electrician. For plumbing, you need a licensed plumber, master gas fitter, all that stuff. Some places, they'll say, yeah, you need a licensed plumbing and electrical, but, if you're going to do a roof, you as the homeowner might be able to do it yourself, et cetera, et cetera. Some of them are more lenient on it. Some of them are more strict, where it's like, hey, for example, Florida, right? Florida is one of those places that they have different licensing types. You have what's called a CGC. That's your general contractor. And they can do most of the stuff as far as construction goes, remodeling, all of that. Of course, they can't touch any of the specialty items like HVAC, electrical, plumbing, all of that stuff. They have to be specialty contractors. But if you don't know that, again, and you're going in and you're researching permits and you find out, hey, yeah, we saw that there was a general permit pulled for painting, but you see that there was a lot more than painting done, that might raise some red flags. And again, the previous owner might have been doing the right thing, but again, you just want to be aware of the risk that you're taking. So again, based on this list, the next thing that you want to do is you want to separate the two things, okay? Let me just see if there's any questions, because I know I've said a lot of things here. Let me just see. I want to make sure that if there are any questions, I'm answering them here. Okay. All right. Doesn't look like I have any questions. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in here, and I'll be able to respond. And if I don't see them right now for whatever reason, just let me know. And again, I will look at it after this is over, and I'll take a look at it then. So I'm not seeing anything coming up here. Okay, so the next thing that you want to do is, in an income producing property, you want to separate the two things, right? It's somewhat basic, but some people miss this. You have income and expenses. So as we talked about previously, when you look at the description, right, they'll tell you right there, right then and there, they'll say, hey, 3 units, the owner's bringing in whatever, $4,000 a month. The first floor is a 3-bedroom, 1 bathroom, bringing in whatever, $1,500. Second floor is 3-bedroom, 1 bathroom, bringing in $1,500, and then the third floor is a 2-bedroom, 1 bathroom, bringing in $1,200, whatever, right? So that's how you get your numbers. Now, some places, now this happens if you have more units. Some places they'll have other sorts of income, right? For example, like laundry. Some places, like here, there's a perfect example. We have laundry facilities here, and we recently um, ended the contract that we had, and we're going to be bringing in new equipment. So we have the previous agreement that we have is with a laundry operator is that they install all their equipment. We of course pay for the um, utilities and any of the water and the electric and the gas consumption, but then we split it. The previous agreement that we had was a 50-50 split. Now the new agreement that we have, we're going to get a 65% split, right? And we did that by looking for different vendors and negotiating that. So now, I don't remember offhand. I think our laundry income last year was something like $4,800 or $5,800. Now I'm able to increase that an additional 15%. You know, it might not be a lot, $5,000. You know, 15% more is what, $750. But again, over the year, those numbers add up by negotiating that one thing. If I would have just not cared and I would have not looked into those contracts and left it just the same, well, most likely our laundry income would have been the same. So understanding those contracts will allow you to maneuver that. Again, when you're buying a smaller unit and you're looking at those income sources, just make sure you know, hey, okay, I'm getting this much from solar. Are they counting that? I'm getting this much from rental. I'm getting this much from washer and dryers. I'm getting maybe you have a vending machine, you know. Some places, I don't remember when, um, this was, as I think about it, I want to say it was a 6 unit, but I think when he sold it, it was separated. It was 3 and 3, but it was sitting kind of in the same territory. So in the laundry thing, they had a little vending machine, right? So sometimes they'll have, you know, soda or whatever, and he was restocking it. He was buying the things at Costco or BJ's or whatever, and then selling them in there, whatever. Some people do that, but understand all the sources of income. You know, most of your income is gonna come from rent. Some people, I've actually seen this multiple times come up, even on a threeplex. Some people, they'll include cable, right? And what they'll do is they'll have a cable agreement for the 3 units, and then they're able to buy the cable for whatever $120 a month, and they'll charge their tenants you know, $60 or $70 a month. So they're getting a little bit up on that. Some people put all the numbers into just one rental amount, so you'll see that, but understand what your rental is. Then the next thing is going to be the expenses, and here I'm probably going to spend like a good chunk, probably 20 minutes, going into just this expense category, because I think it's very, very important for you to understand what are the expenses of owning multifamily or multi-unit property, right? And again, this differs in different parts of the country. Some places, you have some maintenance items that you might not have. So again, this is a very general, broad description, and this video, I will probably make a specific video just on expenses and what to look for. But again, I think it's important for you to be aware of, hey, what are some of the expenses that I need to consider when I'm looking at this stuff? So give me 1 minute as I just check one thing here. Okay, so some of the expenses that I'm gonna go into here are, generally speaking, applicable for multifamily properties. And the reason is because they're buildings, right? In essence, you have a building, so you have the foundation, you have your 4 walls, you have this stuff going on. Other scenarios, it might be a little bit more, a little bit less, but in general, this is where we look at all of our expenses when we are looking at a building. So again, you know what your rental income is, and some people will say, okay, this is getting $4,000 a month, that's great, it's $48,000 a year, but then all of a sudden you start to look at all the expenses, and then it's like, well, your net income after all of your expenses is like $1,000, right? And again, there's different reasons. Some people do it for tax reasons. And again, you don't want to look at a tax statement unless you're buying a larger multifamily property, because that tax statement, a lot of time, It'll have things on there like depreciation and other things that you normally would not consider when you're looking at an income producing property, especially if you're buying a unit just to live rent free, forever. So, um, again, one of these things we already looked at. So, your first expense is your real estate taxes. You want to know what those taxes are, right? And again, by knowing what the trend is it going up? Most of the taxes through COVID and through everything else have gone up. But again, look at the millage rate. Is the millage rate going up, or are your assessed values going up? Because as the market adjusts, or as we have what some will consider stagflation, and again, this has to do, as I mentioned previously, because of the supply and demand. We're 6 million units short, and again, there's micro markets that are seeing a price fluctuation and a price decrease. There's other micro markets that are staying about the same and going up, 1 to 2% month over month, or year over year. So I think we're going to be pretty much at a stagflation because of the supply and demand. But some places where you have negative population, sorry California, some places you are starting to see a little bit more of a price shift happening. And again, I see some of this happening in Arizona as well. Some places they actually have overdeveloped the number of units. Miami is not one of those markets. The demand is still much higher than the supply. We're about 200,000 units short in Miami-Dade County, Broward County, etc. So again, understanding what the micro markets are is very, very important. So real estate taxes, number one. And again, you need to consider that expense because that expense will never go away. Maybe 20 years from now, you own your property outright for whatever crazy reason. You don't want to pay $4,000 or $5,000 in insurance. I don't know why you would do that. I would strongly advise to always have at least some minimal insurance on your property, at least for liability and some sort of property insurance. But for whatever reason, let's say that you want to get rid of your insurance, that number is going to go away. Let's say that, like this previous scenario, you had a pool in your property and the pool had deferred maintenance and you were going to have to invest $10,000, $15,000 to whatever, do something on the pool. All of a sudden you might just cover it up, and again, you don't have to do that, so the pool maintenance number goes away. But your real estate taxes, that number will never go away. And the day you stop paying your real estate taxes, there's a process to it. The city, the county, the state is going to come after you and they're going to take your property. So that's why, always pay your real estate taxes no matter what. The next expense item is, like I said, insurance. You need to know what insurance is, because if you're buying an FHA loan, duplex, threeplex, or fourplex, you're going to have insurance. Even if you're buying a 20 unit or a 200 unit and you're using the bank's money, you're going to have insurance. So understand what that insurance expense is. The next thing, just like we looked over, is your contract services, right? Who's collecting your trash? Who's doing some maintenance on the things? Do you have, I don't know, let's say you have Wi-Fi throughout the property because you have security cameras or whatever. Who's paying for that, right? Make sure you know that. The next thing on your expenses is electric. As I mentioned previously, make sure that you know what that number is. And again, it doesn't matter if you're buying a 2-unit, a 3-unit, a 4-unit, or you're buying 200 units. All of a sudden, you're thinking, hey, you know what? I'm going to live rent-free for a year, forever. I just bought this threeplex. I got, whatever, $3,500 coming in. Between the 2 units, they're each rented for almost $2,000 a month. My mortgage payment is only $3,700, so I'm all set. I'm going to be saving, $1,500 because that I used to be paying rent. All of a sudden, you find out it's like, hey, you know what? That electric, that's whatever, might be $100 a month, right? Oh, you know what? There's gas for whatever areas. That might be $50 a month. Now you're at $150, right? Oh, you know what? The trash that's there, you as the landlord actually have to pay for that. That's $20. So you see how these little things start to add up, and all of a sudden you think you're living rent-free, and you're really not, because these expenses you haven't looked into, right? The other thing, I would say in general, this doesn't apply to some of the smaller units, just because most of the smaller landlords, whenever they have to go through an eviction process or a legal process or whatever, they typically there's resources, right, for smaller landlords, for owner occupied properties, where you can go into your local courthouse and you'll say, hey, my tenant's not paying me, what do I need to do? And some owners, they try to do it themselves. They don't hire an attorney, or they don't file the paperwork, or they don't use a constable. They do mailings or whatever. Depending on what you want to do, the legal costs, you want to know what's there. Now again, if you're buying a 20 unit, a 40 unit, a 100 unit, most of the time you'll have a budget line in there for legal, because you'll have legal things come up, notices that need to be sent, contracts that need to be drafted. So you, as an experienced or a larger owner, will know that you need to have some sort of legal thing in there. The next thing is management. Now, what's interesting is, when I was thinking about, is owning multifamily property, living on that property, and ultimately living rent free for everyone, I ultimately said, well, in some scenarios, I think it is, but in other scenarios, some people need a little bit more professional help, and that's going to lower their income numbers, because they're going to need something called property management. Now, the interesting thing about property management is that, because of the years and because of so many states have done regulations, most property managers have actually improved their service, and it's fairly easy for you to say, and there's Google reviews, social media, whatever, there's fairly easier for you now to find better property managers than, let's say, 10 years ago, right? For whatever reason, right? So if you're not such a hands-on person, if you don't understand the basics of construction, or let's say you just you work 60 to 8 hours a week, you're a busy, nursing professional or doctor or whatever, you might consider property management might be right for you. Now, the thing with property management is, again, they take a property management fee off your rental income. So, understanding how that works, let's say you're bringing in $3,500 a month from 2 units. If you put in a property management company, even though they're going to be taking care of the rent collection and some of the things, they're going to charge you for that 10%. So that might be $350. So you might say, well, I work a lot, so my hourly wage when I work overtime is $60 an hour. I don't really have the time to do it, so to pay $300 a month, or $350 a month to a property management, it's worth it for me, because that's one less headache that I have. So again, when you look at this, understand that it's not always about living rent free. It's also understanding about how to increase your income. Now, as we talked about previously, if rent is something that you no longer have to worry about, right? Now you might be able to say, well, these the income that I'm getting from these units is bringing enough where I don't need to have a second job. Let me improve my skills, so that way I can potentially earn more income by having a different skill category. And that's what happened to me, right? Like, I was a college graduate. I could work in the professional field, all of that, be an architect, be an engineer, but that path, I just realized, financially speaking, wasn't for me. And I realized, hey, I wanted to go into business. I wanted to get into real estate. I wanted to get into construction. I want to do developments. And being a path of architect or engineer wasn't a direct path for me. Now, I'm not saying that it might not be for you. Maybe you're a nurse. Maybe you've always wanted to do, I don't know, legal or some other profession, right? Or even if it's not profession, some technical stuff, right? Maybe you always wanted to do that, but because of all of your responsibilities, you've never been able to do that, because you have this rental payment that isn't allowing you to go to school. Well, now that you got rid, or at least lowered your rental payment, now you might have the time in order for you to go and get that skill, in order for you to earn more income. So again, this is where property management, I think, in some scenario comes into play. And if you want to think about it as a smart investor, I think even from the beginning, it's a good idea to say, hey, if I bought this 3-plex or 4-plex, and I, looked at it as an investment 100%, if I gave it to a property manager, could I afford that, 10% for property management, and is it still going to bring me a return that, I'm happy with, or a return that, is a substantial amount, right? So you need to consider that property management fee, I believe. Um, and then the other thing that you'll want, and this will, that's why I said I'm going to spend 20 minutes on expenses, is what's called your reserves. So some people, what they'll do is they'll have everything under maintenance, right? They'll buy some older building and they'll say, wait, well, I needed to fix this. That was a maintenance item. For tax purposes on smaller stuff, most of the time I think you can get away with it. And again, when you have larger units, for example, 20 units or 40 or 100 units, you'll actually want to have some capital expenditures because that will offset your basis. And if you, again, this is a little bit more advanced, but if you know what I'm talking about, the basis for IRS tax purposes is when you bought your property, let's say you bought it for $500,000. And again, the basis is just your property value, not including the land. So let's just say it's worth 500,000. Your basis is 500,000. You depreciate that, but what ends up happening is, because now you're doing these capital expenditures like improving a kitchen, changing out windows, those are staying with the property. You're increasing your basis. So let's say you improved a kitchen and you changed out all the windows, and that was a $75,000 project. Now your basis is that 500,000 plus that 75,000. So when you resell the property for, let's say, 750,000, it's not just going to be that 500,000 and that 750, the difference of the 250. It's actually going to be that $75,000 of capital expenditures and improvements that you did. So now you're reducing your tax liability to 175. Again, my wife is the tax expert. I married up. She's the tax professional that does specifically this stuff for other real estate investors that we work with, as well as our portfolio. So she understands that much better. But again, understanding these reserves will allow you to plan for capital improvements as well as repairs. You don't know how many times I've seen people put themselves in a bind where they'll buy a property, they're already very financially constricted, and they won't plan for, shit hitting the fan. Like I said in one of my previous videos, for whatever reason, a boiler, right, your heating system, it never craps out on a lukewarm day in May. It always craps out in the coldest day of winter in the middle of February, where there's no plumbers available, where you got to pay extra money for a plumber to get out there. So unless you have that, capital expenditures in your budget, you need to plan for that, because the last thing you want is to not know, hey, the boiler is 10 years old. It's coming up on 15-year lifespan. Probably in the next 5 years, I got to plan that at some point my boiler is going to crap out. So again, that gives you a negotiating tactic in order to negotiate the sales price with the seller, but also allows you to really plan for some material items in the future, right? Let's say that you're seeing that, hey, this porch is in really bad condition. The stairwell looks like it's falling apart. You're going to have a lot of expenses that are going to come up with things that you need to do. Or if you have other things that are, really old, you better plan for those, because otherwise, all of a sudden, that $3,500 a month, if every single month something breaks down and you're coming up $300, $400, $500, all of a sudden, that live rent for free is not looking real good. Ask me how I know. So the other thing that's interesting about reserves, and I've seen some smaller investors will do that. I think if you're syndicating on larger deals, I don't think that it's a good idea to do this just to show returns. But what some smaller investors will do, and typically this happens if you just manage your own portfolio, and let's say you got 10, 20, 30 units and you're not really working with partnership, and that's kind of your nest egg, right? What they'll do is they'll just say, hey, it's a good idea that I'll just keep the 10% of my general expenses. I'll keep 10% of that in an account, but I won't really build up these reserves And again, I think if in general speaking, if you have 20, 30, 40 units, and you probably have, ten to $20,000 in an account somewhere, cash ready available, or even a line of credit, that's probably a good rule of thumb. Now, again, if you have 400 units and you're syndicating deals, you probably want to have that reserve account there. And what it'll end up doing is that in the initial stages, the cash on cash return will kind of be lower because you're funding that reserve account. But then what ends up happening is that at 5 year, let's say you hold it for 5 years and then you resell, that cash account is coming back to you. So then your return on capital over the 5 year period might be a little bit higher. So that's how that works when it comes to reserves. So the next thing that you want to look at, and this is be your final item after everything, is your debt service, right? Your loan payment is your principal and interest. So again, if you're looking to live rent free and that's your goal, don't just look at, hey, the amount of rent that I'm bringing in is $3,750. My mortgage payment is $3,500. Oh, I'm golden. I'm going to live rent free forever. If you don't consider all those expenses that we just talked about for the last 20 minutes, or if you don't see the property conditions and what state they're in, and are they good, are they not good, do I need to plan for a deck replacement, do I need to plan for boilers, is my roof about to go bad, right? If you don't plan for that, then it's not just your mortgage payment, right? There's more expenses that you need to have. And again, I don't want to discourage you, because some people, what they'll do is they'll look at this video and they'll go in and they'll be like, oh my God, I need to plan for a huge amount. Every year I'm going to spend $10,000 on maintenance or whatever. Like, that's just not the reality, right? Let's start one step at a time. Now, again, don't be so foolish or so optimistic that you're like, oh, none of this bad stuff is going to happen to me. I'm just going to buy it. I know I'm going to live rent free. If something comes up, I'll just use my credit card and overlook some of the deferred maintenance, right? Like, plan for that. So the next thing you'll want to look at is that your principal and interest. Because interest rates are constantly shifting, especially in today's environment, I think where we were for the last 20 years at 2 and 3% interest rates, that's a little crazy. I know there's some more advanced strategies like subject to that are being used in order to buy properties and keep the existing low interest rates that seller had, etc. Those are some strategies that you can apply. But again, if you're looking to buy a duplex, a threeplex, or fourplex, and you're looking to live in one unit and rent out the other ones using an FHA mortgage, most likely you're not doing a subject to. You might in some scenarios. There's some more skills you have to learn in order to do that strategy. But again, for all sakes and purposes, I wanted to make this simple and just say, hey, if you're working a job, if you're doing something and you're just looking to live rent-free forever, what are the steps? And this is what I'm giving you here. So again, subject to is another thing. So look at principal and interest on what your payments are going to be. And, somewhere down the line, you should be able to refinance. I think for all sakes and purposes, I think we are going to probably stick between 5 and 7%. I think that's a very, I want to say normal, but I think that's a rate that most banks can still make a profit that they can live with. I think the 2 and 3% was not even keeping with inflation. So if we ever see it again in the next 100 years, take advantage of it. If we don't, I think 5 to 7% is going to be normal. So just plan for that. So that's about it for what you want to think on your expenses side. So just to sum up, the conclusion of this video and what we looked at today is when you do an income property analysis, and again, if you're doing a 2-unit, 3-unit, 4-unit versus if you're doing a 40-unit, the first thing that you need to consider is your end goal, right? Is your end goal to live rent-free? Some of this stuff is not going to apply for you. Now, if you're looking at a 40-unit and you're looking to maximize profits, or you're looking for maximum cash flow, understanding your income and expenses is going to be huge, as well as understanding, hey, what property am I buying? Are there, some improvements that I could do? Are there rents that are lower that now I can increase? Are there expenses that I can decrease? Is there something that I could do in order to increase that rent amount, like put in a dog park, renovate the pool, whatever the scenario is, right? So some of those things that you need to look at, but ultimately you need to know what you're solving for. Are you just solving for living rent free, or are you solving for, I got money to invest, I want an investment that gives me a 10% return, so I'm gonna analyze this thing to death until I get that, or am I okay with a 6% return, whatever. That's up to you to decide and figure that out. And again, unless you're doing a value add, you're not gonna get a 15-20% return unless, like I've done, you shift into the mobile home park market or the RV park market, just because the returns there are higher than what they're going to be on multifamily. So with that, I think I'm going to wrap up this video. Let me see if there's any questions that have come up. And I apologize if I don't see your questions on this chat relay, because I am using a streaming service in order to broadcast to multiple places. But go ahead and put your question in the comments, and I'll make sure to answer them. If you have any further questions, feel free to direct message me. Send me a message. Like I said, I review property videos all the time, give you my feedback, tell you what additional things I'll be looking out for. And, we'll continue this series. Make sure you tune in to next week. I don't know what the topic is going to be next week, but again, just continuing that, I think I'm going to start to get into, putting in offers and putting in purchase and sale agreements and going over some of the basic contract material stuff. So at least you get to see, so when you're working with a real estate professional, or if for whatever crazy reason you're doing this on your own, you can understand some of the things to look out for in the contract. So with that, that's going to be it. Thank you for joining in. I hope you have an awesome rest of the week, of your Monday, and I'll see you on here on the next video.